Hi everybody, Jim Thomas here, Niles Discovery Church. The City of Fremont City Council has approved putting up a housing navigation center in downtown Fremont. We sort of wanted it to be at our church here, but we're happy that it's going in someplace here in Fremont. And the Friends of the Navigation Center, as well as Niles Discovery Church, are so ecstatic about it. We had a meeting yesterday to discuss what our next steps and to celebrate the victory as well. So here, check it out.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you. If everyone could grab a plate of food and settle into a comfy chair here, we're going to get going in a couple seconds here. First of all, I want to introduce myself. My name is Hayes Chair, and I'm one of our many volunteers. Some of you know me, some of you may not, but we've been involved in advocating for this HNC for the last couple months, and this is our party, and this is for you guys, because we did it. Several weeks ago, we received a 7-0 approval from the City Council, and I think we have to stop and think about what that really means for a second here. I mean, it took a lot of strong leadership from the City Council, but that is an unequivocal message that Fremont is a compassionate city. It leaves no sign for question. And we're here today celebrating not only how it happened, why it happened, but the community that came together to help move this along. Tonight we have a really cool program for you guys. First of all, we would love to thank the City Council personally. We have they're used to doing honorariums and honoring folks that come to them, and we wanted to flip the tables a little bit. We wanted to fill out this big card that we have on this table right here. Everyone, please sign it after this program is over, and we are going to be presenting to our City Council at the next available City Council hearing as a public statement of our appreciation for what they did. Secondly, I know all of you are passionate and engaged and want to know how can I do more with homelessness, the housing crisis, any other local issues you might think that's affecting our community. This is an opportunity for us to get together. We have various stations set up around the room with some discussions, topics, and facilitators. So we've carved out some time for us to get together and discuss as a community. And I take a lot of pride in being able to introduce. We have a keynote speaker today, Mr. Louis Chicoine. Hey. Louis. This gentleman is the executive director of Abode Services. He's been involved in homelessness for 26 years. He probably knows more about issues regarding homelessness and the unhoused population more so than any person out there. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Louis to come up and give us a statement. Thank you. Right. Let's welcome him.
Good evening, everyone. I love the French pronunciation of my first name. Take that as a compliment. I asked and was given permission to speak and provide some reflection. As Hayes mentioned, I've been doing this for a while, and I've been doing it in Fremont. I'm a resident of Niles, and I live less than 200 yards from this church site. And I found the experience very difficult to go through this summer, to watch what some of my neighbors are saying about homeless people. And but out of that came a recognition how important it is for those of us who care about humanity, who care about more than material things, quite frankly, more than our mortgages, more than just succeeding in the quote-unquote American dream, that we really need to spend some time reflecting on who we're talking about. Because it seems like these conversations rapidly move into abstracts and quite frankly, unfortunately, echo chambers. And council members that are here can really attest to that, because they had to listen to hours and hours of people saying the same sort of thing to them. So I want to remind people of two things about unhoused people in Fremont. First, there's a sense of urgency right now about the status of people who don't have a home. Quite frankly, I have not seen the sort of panic trauma, the sort of hopelessness that I'm seeing with the homeless individuals that I interact with on a regular basis. And I think that's because it, quite frankly, has never been this bad. When I first started in this work, if someone was homeless, there was a hope that you could claw your way into housing somehow. You could rent a room somewhere, you could get a couple roommates together, and maybe afford to rent something. And now, particularly in communities like Fremont, that's really completely out of the reach of most people who are extremely low income. And it usually leads, if they're not homeless at the beginning of that income reality, then it usually leads to them going there. So there's a sense of urgency amongst homeless people, and certainly a sense of urgency among those of us who work with homeless people. And I have to say, I am proud that the city finally took an action, but I put it that way, finally took an action. It's 20 months after the city council declared a shelter emergency, and we still do not have a lot of the programs that the state has provided the local community money for. So I celebrate with everyone in this room the victory, but I think that it's, we can do better. We can do better. The other thing I want to say, I've done 20, I think I counted 21 separate community engagement processes. I've heard every single nasty thing a human being can think about saying about other human beings at those meetings. And I really don't find any value in it anymore. And I wonder why, quite frankly, the state of California is starting to realize this, that when it comes to housing, no one wants it. Once it got, people have their own home, they really don't care to have anyone else have a home. Because I think intuitively people know the value of their home will probably be greater if there's scarcity around housing. So that's the truth. And that was behind a lot of what we saw people saying about the Navigation Center is exclusion, they concluded would be in their best interest. So I really want us to ask ourselves, consider doing processes that first of all respect the humanity of everyone that lives in this city and doesn't involve encouraging people to live in their fears and their selfish self-interest. Let's try to have processes that don't do that. And it can be done. I know there are certain processes you have to do under Brown Act and under government in California, but we didn't have to do it this way. So that's a reflection. I own that personally as an opinion. I feel strongly about it, and I say it for the people I try to defend every day who don't have homes. Where are we going from here? I want a couple reflections. I know the city is thinking about and working on a growing issue that's happening right now around people who are attempting to live in their cars, in their RVs, on the streets. Mountain View City Council had a long meeting last night and voted to prohibit parking of RVs in most of the city. I understand industrial areas, which there aren't many in Mountain View, would be available theoretically for people to park. So I think we got to be watching that, and we got to be the conscience for our community around what do we do with people who are, quite frankly, being innovative is another way to think about it. They're not living in a creek bed and or behind a building or on the streets itself. They figured out they'll buy an RV and live in that. Not ideal, not great, but I would really want us to think and be ready as a group, as opposed to what happened to us this summer, for that conversation, because I think it's coming. I think one of the things I've heard from city staff that's encouraging is the idea that maybe safe parking would be something that could be supported in the city, and maybe that's something we could, as a group here, try to get behind and see if that can happen. One of the communities that we work in, San Jose, that does safe parking, I think successfully, they utilize church relationships with the faith community, and they have small, basically safe parking programs where you don't have a ton of these in a church parking lot, but you have a smaller number, and you do, maybe 10, 20 different faith communities across the city. So I think they're creative solutions that we ought to think about, and again, I think we ought to be the conscience of the city on that and ask for reflection on what people need. The final thing I'll say is, and I've said this in postings to this group, I've said it elsewhere, just a reminder that there's really only one thing that works to end homelessness. And we get distracted all the time from that one thing, and that's housing. Housing, housing, housing. And it's really hard for local government, for county government, state government to dedicate the funding that's necessary to do housing for special needs and extremely low-income populations. But we know now that data is really clear. That is what ends homelessness, particularly when you target it for those who have special needs, who don't really have the capacity to earn enough income to move forward. So I want to encourage this group to, I'm going to be a voice, and I'd ask you to join me. Yeah, David laughs because he knows I'm going to do that. For us to stay focused. It's not to say that compassionate activities aren't important. That's a way to say to homeless people you care about them, actually, so all that's valuable. But ultimately, we should have public funds dedicated to what works, based in science. There's a lot of research that's clear, it's not ambiguous, we know it works. The Navigation Center makes sense to the degree that it's going to work. It's going to be about the housing that's connected to it. It's not the Navigation Center itself. Navigation Center itself provides some value, but it has to be a navigation to housing, a pathway to housing. So those are some thoughts. I was kidding over here, told someone I was going to go on for 3 hours. So I promise I won't do that. Tara suggested that maybe we could take a couple questions if anyone was interested, or statements or anything. So that, yes, Nancy.
Can you give your thoughts on like the little tiny houses that are kind of like sheds that are being built?
Yeah. So unfortunately, I have a lot of experience with that. We've done a couple projects that have been unsuccessful. And I won't bore you with all the details, but one of the projects that we're doing was in San Jose, and the manufacturer went bankrupt. There aren't enough manufacturers who have enough financing behind them to be trustworthy enough to move forward. So we backed out of that project. We're going to build a permanent supported housing project there eventually, but we backed out of a tiny home approach because it just was too risky. So that's an example. What does work, and what I do think is in the future, is what's referred to as manufactured housing. And so this is, if you can imagine, Lego stacking of buildings. And at the end of the day, you can do quite a bit of density. It's really a good idea for single adults, because you can do micro units. We're doing 2 projects in Santa Clara County that involve micro units, one in Hayward actually as well. And the idea is if if the product can be produced in a factory, then you get the Model T model, right? So you go down an assembly line. These factories are fascinating. It looks just like how a car would be built, goes from one stage to the next. That market is still not stable enough, but I think in the next 5 years it would be. The last piece I'd say about tiny homes is it's a wonderful idea for the bigger need, I think, in a community around the missing middle, around a place for kids or adults who are aging, who want less of a space and maybe want to live in the back of a house, have enough privacy, but be close to their family. It can be done pretty cheaply. The problem is, and a lot of our problems are related to land use and how we create barriers, cost barriers and process barriers. Our own senator, Bob Wieckowski, not putting a plug in for anyone, just mentioning Bob's been a proponent for this and has legislation that is attempting to address the barriers to that. So I think that's a good model on another basis, yeah. Yes, sir.
You mentioned safe parking, and I happen to know in my neighborhood some unused parking spaces where Orchard Supply Hardware recently closed, and presumably something will eventually come in that maybe there could be a program of whenever a business closes, until that space is reoccupied, those parking spaces could be turned into safe parking spaces. I know there also may be some advantage to using faith communities because people from the church or the group would help keep an eye out. I don't know who keep an eye out at Orchard Supply Hardware.
Yeah, I mean, you could conceivably have a faith community sort of adopt a location that isn't theirs, but you're saying I'm going to adopt this location and help people out. Yeah, it deserves some planning. I'll give one other piece of opinion, because I'm free with my opinions. I do wonder after this navigation center conversation whether we should have just picked a industrial site and went with that. Now, that's not what homeless people needed the most, but I don't think we needed the sort of delays and so forth. So I think with this sort of safe parking, it might be wise to think politically about what, if we are planning to go through a process again, where could we do it and just take action? And you might still have opposition, but maybe you're not in the middle of someone's neighborhood. It would be a little easier. Yes, Linda?
How many units does a boat get on the market every year?
Wow. Everyone hear that? How many units put on the market every year? So any given night, we have about 3,200 homes units that we're in control of, that we have formerly homeless people living in. And we're developing a strategic plan right now, and our plan is to, I think we've got a board member here, so don't get in trouble, but I think what the board is likely to approve is a plan to get at least 2 new homes a day, every day of the year, to be that aggressive. I mean, right now we're developing 15 supportive housing projects, some of those with partners, most of them on our own across the Bay Area, because communities are realizing that the real deficit in the Bay Area is around homelessness is having permanent supportive housing. Yes, hi, Suzanne.
Hi. So I'd like you to, I guess, speak to the issue that even with increased affordable housing units, which are taking people at extremely low, according to HUD, 30% of median, even 20% of median, that there is a huge portion of the homeless population that does not qualify and will not qualify for that housing without some kind of permanent subsidy. So in addition to building more units, which is certainly part of the solution, I think we need to have some kind of source of providing subsidies to people who are disabled or elderly or making $850 a month on a fixed income, and that's it. You can't even rent a room in Fremont for less than $850 a month.
That's right.
I think That's another part of the solution. to
Right,
the
so we
problem.
talk a lot about development now because it's fun and a lot of work and all that, but Suzanne's right that probably it remains the quickest way to get at housing is basically to go to the marketplace and, master lease in some cases where an individual sort of needs a liaison between them and the landlord. That would be in the case of folks who have severe disabilities like mental health disabilities, or more commonly is a lease that is subsidized. And Boat Service is actually the largest provider of this sort of housing in the Bay Area. Almost half of our budget is dedicated to subsidy pool that goes to that, about $35 million annually. Quite frankly, and to Suzanne's point, and I'd love to see the state get more involved in this, right? And that's the other thing that we need to realize with, I put a little pressure on friends of the city, but the city can't do this alone. It really involves the county, which has primary responsibility for the safety net, and the state of California. And quite frankly, there hasn't been a lot of working together very well over the years. It's getting better, I think, quite a bit better. But in Alameda County, I would not say we're as organized as we could be, to put it politely. So to Suzanne's point, if those entities, and maybe even the federal government someday, get involved, we could really impact housing in a quick way. So the nice thing about the subsidy idea is you just basically have to secure the unit with staff who are trained to work with landlords. You could do that pretty quickly. You build a building, the advantage there is it's restricted for the life of that building, but it takes 4 or 5 years to build. And it's costly in a different way, in a capital way. So having several tools in your toolbox is really the wise approach. Yeah, Iris.
Well, I had a similar question. A group of us at Greater Niles Village just read Evicted by Desmond. One of the stats that he gives in that book is that most very low income people are basically in the lottery. And only 1 in 4 eligible households eligible for subsidies actually gets a subsidized unit.
Yeah.
So it's a pretty devastating
Yeah.
number. And
Yeah.
I think,
And it wasn't always that way.
No.
So I have a chart outside my office that tracks the increase in homelessness, and the Abode Services was created in this community. Some of you in this room were involved in creating it. And it was created in the 80s when homelessness spiked. It happened at the same time that Reagan, well, he happened to be the president, the federal government cut dramatically those subsidy programs out of HUD, and they've never recovered. And so national homelessness is rooted in this access to housing issue that you're pointing out.
and it does seem like there is a need for a new narrative around, I don't know what the right terminology is, I wish I were a good marketer, but a right
Yeah.
to housing being a basic right in this country that we provide to people.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. A delegation from the UN recently visited Oakland and looked at what's going on in Oakland. If you haven't been on the streets in Oakland, we do some services in Oakland. It's pretty shocking. I think it's, this community could easily be there in a couple of years without some response. And Oakland's got challenges beyond what we have, but the UN delegation actually used terms they use in third world countries to describe what they were seeing. And I think that's really, we need to have a values check on this as a country. It's going to take some leadership, which we don't have right now.
I just want to add, I think we need to go back to some narratives about what worked. And I'm not very schooled in this, but when I was a kid, My family was coming up right after World War II, and there was a tremendous housing shortage in California because, you know, I don't know how many thousands of people, but I know in Richmond alone, 25,000 people came into that community during the war years.
To work in,
quadrupled.
yeah, Liberty ships, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so there needs to be kind of a change in the narrative that yes, we did it. We did it before and we can do it again. It's kind of part of what I think is an important thing we need to say.
I belong to an organization down in San Jose called Destination Home, and this is an organization that advocates for addressing homelessness in Santa Clara County, very organized group. And Cisco Systems gave Destination Home $50 million, and one of the things they're doing with that money is creating a campaign called Housing Ready Communities. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at, Iris. It's this sense of, you know, instead of being defensive about this, just sort of ask community, ask the natural supporters in a community to sort of infiltrate the thinking about this and get communities ready for housing. And instead of making it there's a lot of stigma. Again, I'm sure the council members could speak to they had to hear some things that we should provide some counseling to those of you who had to listen for hours. That's your job, right? You have to listen. But quite frankly, some of it was really hard to hear. And you had to listen to all of it. Some of us could turn the channel, which is what I was doing. But I think, that's one of the things this group did. And there are many more people that were part of this group than are here tonight, provided a alternative dialogue about this. But I think we're just beginning, and we need to do a lot more of this. I think you had a question.
I did, thank you. I want to take a few steps backwards, and I'm coming up against strong opposition from the people that I love, my friends and family, and they tell me, well, part of the problem is many people want to be there. They want to be on the street. They don't want to be in housing. So is there some points, something that I can, I really want to whack them.
Well, I wouldn't recommend that. I understand the feeling, though.
But it's frustrating. I mean,
Yeah.
literally, people that are my family, well, they want to be there. And it's extremely difficult to hear about.
Yeah, please.
So we did a point-in-time count. We count the homeless every 2 years. We counted in January. The reports are just out now. They'll be up on our website for Fremont, but also for the county because the numbers were similar. Only 3% of the homeless indicated they do not want to be housed. So that clearly is a myth. And in our community, we did deeper surveys with like 285 homeless persons, and again, 3%, only 3% said they liked living out there on the land. Everybody else said we would like to be sheltered.
It's really good to hear, and then maybe I'll connect on get that.
Yeah, and I think there's some data. I know there's some data. We'll have to sort of, maybe Suzanne and I can help with that. The other thing I would add is there's probably about another 3 or 4%. Our outreach staff report that there are people, the way to think about it is there are people in process. So there's probably another 3 or 4% that are really struggling with stabilizing around mental health issues. And that keeps them from, quite frankly, embracing what they probably really want in a moment of lucidity. So that can be addressed through continual engagement.
I noticed that in Oakland, I go often with St. Vincent de Paul and serve lunch, and I noticed that at least 1/3 of those clients, they don't have the right mind.
Right, but I think that, but again, most of even that subset, if approached in a trusting, caring manner, a professional manner, it may not be that moment that they're going to eventually go into housing. Matter of fact, we have a program in Oakland called OPRI that has rehoused 120 folks, most of them have severe mental health issues. And there is a 5 years of that program, retention at 96%. They actually do better than families we rehouse. So if I could just say one more thing about that, and how are we doing with time? 3 minutes, okay, good. I think that in all the years I've worked with homeless people, they're people. And, they're saving face. So if someone says, why are you on the street? You could easily get someone saying, because I chose to be here. Get out of my face. If they don't trust you, if they're not, why would you, that's the dynamic that happens. I've often tried to figure out what people mean by that, and I think that's probably part of it, is the way they're being approached.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Sharing on top of that question, on a micro level, before I get to the question, whenever I focus on activity, if there's a part of me that's away and being distracted by another thought, I'm not able to maintain the activity. It's not done best. So what I notice is the potions in the community, and how are we going to make everyone more open to solving this issue? Because really, we're not all together as a whole community. Like, we got this room, there's a lot of people in here, but there's not as much as there could be to focus on this problem. So how can we make more people open to this?
Well, that probably is about a 3-hour answer. But I'll give you another. I told you about it last time. This is my last opinion, but I have one more opinion. I think I grew up during the 60s when the federal government had to come in and in the South and tell southern states that they were going to have to allow black kids to go to the white school. And I think housing is a civil rights issue of our time. This is what separates us around income inequality. This is the canary in the mine, if you will. So my answer is we should not have as much democracy. We need to have action and leadership, moral leadership on this issue. We shouldn't have long discussions about whether people have a right to be somewhere that is safe for them. We should take action. So if we declare a shelter emergency, we should act. That's my answer to that. One more question.
She's got her hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. 2 more questions. You and then I'll come back.
Mine's, I actually have it bolted to one. First of all, with the use of the 211 system, which is kind of the question, if people don't know how that works, you might want to discuss for Fremont or County, perhaps developing our own. Second, how are you recommending, or what are the steps for engaging Alameda County to put in some fire underneath people right now? If we're dependent upon Alameda County, and I know the state's on top of it with our current governor, if you can talk a little bit about that.
So 2-1, actually it's the same answer. I don't think we should do separatism. I think 211, we should make it work. If it isn't working, it's because it's not adequately funded, and there's advocacy of the county. The second one is the county's doing some things right. We work a lot with various county departments. Unfortunately, the way this county's culture has developed over time, it's a fiefdom. The sheriff protects his budget, the health department protects their budget, social services, and they don't really coordinate very well around very sophisticated problems like homelessness. There is a conversation that's starting to happen in the cities. I know our mayor actually has been involved in pushing on the county, and the conversation is starting to push the county to a place where they're thinking about a more cohesive, unified, centralized approach to homelessness. So to answer your last question, I think we should double down on advocating for that sort of approach. Thanks. And sorry.
I'm just wondering about if there's any effort to engage AC Transit with efforts, for housing.
Thought I
and
saw
things
Diane,
like
she's
that.
not here.
Sorry?
Yeah, I thought Diane was here, she isn't.
Oh, okay. Because, well, for example, I volunteer with the food bank at a place in Union City,
Okay.
which is maybe 2 miles from my house, and to get there on the bus is I have to transfer plus walk 20 minutes from the closest bus stop.
Yeah.
And then recently I went to Laguna Common for an event, and trying to get there was
Right.
not as bad, but it was close. And I just think that was a major talking point for the anti-Dakota people, even though there's like 5 major arteries
Yeah.
on right in that area. But
Yeah, I always love it when NIMBYs use the argument, oh, this wouldn't be good for the people who would
yeah,
be
and
living
they
here.
clearly
It's
did
always
not
a lovely
have
argument.
never been on the 99 bus and
Right.
didn't know how close
Yeah.
it gets to
Yeah.
Kaiser and such.
So I think transportation is a major issue. I know Suzanne's worked somewhat with that issue and making sure that we have, over the years, she's been a strong advocate for paratransit and so forth. I think we're just really, we're abandoned somewhat. It's a Southern Alameda County problem. It is a major issue if you're poor, transportation. So again, around homelessness, it's housing, and then about 50 issues right after that. And transportation's one of them. The other thing I would say real quick is I wish Diane could be here. Apparently she's doing her job tonight with the AC Transit. She's terrific. I've had conversations with her about how to, we're talking before we're doing projects now about whether we can make adjustments in lines and so forth. They've got a lot of competing interests, but she's very open and she's a terrific person to work with. Diane Shaw. So I can get you the contact.
So it sounds like the answer is yes, that there is.
It's a big issue, I think. It's a big issue. Okay, we'll stop there.
Hey.
Thank you.
That's the thing I love about Lewis. I mean, he opens his mouth and suddenly all these ideas just come flying out of everywhere. He just has so much background on everything. So thank you very much. And we're going to segue to our next portion of the evening. And this is going to be the fun portion where we get to interact with each other and really discuss these issues. We heard so many regional issues. We heard educational issues, housing, local, state, county. So one of them, the education portion, is about sort of messaging around homelessness, housing, and the connection of those particular elements and the way to sort of educate others about the nuances of the issue. The local advocacy is more specific to what we can do here in Fremont. For example, an unhoused Bill of Rights, or a parking zone, or some sort of citizen unhoused committee to be an advisory commission to the city council. Those are local issues. On the state level, there's a lot of bills by our state assembly and our SB and AB that address these issues, from funding to illegalizing exclusionary zoning. That's the place to, and also to connect with your representative. That's an opportunity there. And this is my personal favorite. There's a volunteerism one where we'll be able to connect you directly with an organization that's currently doing great work in the community right now if you're excited to get your feet wet. Oh, yes. So there's going to be one facilitator, and whatever sandwich board calls your name, just go there, and they will be explaining the nuances of what's happening on those levels, what could be happening, and opening up to discussion, and we'll be writing down your ideas and then we'll be getting in touch with you about how to implement some of these ideas, and hoping that you self-organize in that way. So I was also reminded to remind you guys, please sign the card to City Council, and let's have fun. Thank you.